As we sit here in the Big Bid Theory studios, summer's almost over, but things are certainly heating up in education across the U.S. Many universities, colleges, K through 12 back in session as of a few weeks ago or so. If it's true, and many are saying somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of jobs in the future are going to require literacy in technology, are we preparing our future workforce? Heck, for that matter, are we using the appropriate methods to teach and learn? In this episode, a leader and innovator in education stops by to discuss education and technology. It's an excellent conversation. I'm a little biased, but some really good stuff, so stick around. Hello from Austin. Bill Culhane, your host of The Big Bid Theory. Rick Jennings, as always, is behind the glass. Rick, as I drove in this morning, are you ready for what we call fall in Austin, meaning temperatures dropping below 100 degrees?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, definitely great to be back here and great to be on our way to sub 100 degree weather. We're finally starting to see storm clouds here in Austin again, and I can't remember the last time we consistently saw any of those.
I'm ready to pull a jacket out. In my time, our schools had these cool high-tech gadgets called calculators. We had crayons. You're a few months younger than me. With us talking about technology and education, what are some interesting tech that you remember using in your time back, let's say high school and down in San Marcos at Texas State?
Sure. Well, to give a little bit of context, I graduated high school in the year 2010. One of my school district was actually pretty well funded, and I can remember as early as middle school, so around probably about 2005, a little bit before that, we did start to use new bits of technology that just hadn't been utilized at that time. So I remember from time to time they would provide us computers and laptops to help take on some assignments that we needed to use like software resources for, like creating PowerPoints and doing a little bit of research on the web. And by the time I got to high school, every student was actually issued their own laptop for the year. I want to say almost a good majority of many assignments that we had actually had to be done using computers. And I know that the district was really encouraged to push that as much as they could, too. So there was a lot of integration with technology there, and especially using resources to utilize online courses as to where we could turn in assignments and things on these little portals that were used by our school. And by the time I got to Texas State in the year 2010, it almost seemed that that was almost all that we were using, other than just still turning in some assignments in class, but a very good majority of what we were doing was based using computers, technology, and the internet. And it's really interesting to see how far we've come with all these new innovations.
Graduated in 2010. Way to make me feel old, Rick. Kidding, but you mentioned a few things that Dr. Bathon will touch on. Schools providing technology-related resources, the power of the internet, etc. We see so many bids in BidPrime's database for tech purchases coming out of education, and it's across the board: elementary, high school, middle school, college, university, you name it. No further ado, our guest this episode is Dr. Justin Bathon. Here's his background. Dr. Bathon is an associate professor in the Department of Educational Leadership Studies at the University of Kentucky there in Lexington, and he's busy. He's also the director of Innovative School Models for the College of Education, co-director of the Next Generation Leadership Academy at the college, and co-director of UCEA Center for the Advanced Study of Technology, Leadership, and Education, also referred to as CASTLE. By the way, you can look at the rest of his bio in the description of the podcast, but here's what caught Kevin's eye. Dr. Bathon's research focuses on the underlying code of education and the changes necessitated by the digital global age. If you're in education, went to school, have someone in school, one of your kids, or you're thinking about going back to school, matters not. You'll want to hear this. Here's my conversation with Dr. Justin Bathon.
As introduced, Dr. Bathon awaits on the Big Bid Theory hotline. Dr. Bathon, thanks so much for visiting with our audience. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Bill. It's always fun to talk education and help inform a broader audience about what we do.
That is our plan, no doubt about it. Now, I just went through some of your background as an introduction to this segment. I couldn't help but notice, and maybe because once upon a time I lived in Illinois, but I couldn't help but notice that you earned your Juris Doctor degree, your JD, from Southern Illinois University. And one of the things we do on this show is we always aim to inform. Southern Illinois has one of the very most awesome nicknames in all of the entirety of college athletics. What is a Saluki?
A Saluki is an ancient breed of dog. The region of Southern Illinois likes to think of itself as Little Egypt because a bunch of rivers come together in the same way that the river flows through, the Nile flows through Egypt. And so because of those Egyptian ties, I think SIU chose a Egyptian mascot. And so a Saluki is an Egyptian breed of dog that's very old.
It's awesome. I already was aware that the Saluki was the mascot, and you did a far better job of giving the background than I ever could. But anyway.
I am from Illinois and proud, from Southern Illinois, and proud to be from Little Egypt. And so that all resonates with us.
Very good. Well, I wasn't from, for a time, I lived up in the Champaign-Urbana area. But anyway, let's roll up our sleeves. Education. I come from a family of educators. As a matter of fact, my eldest son heard the call. And the story on why he entered, he's been a teacher for about 8 years here in the Austin area. But anyway, the story on why he entered the field of education, it's interesting, but it's for another time. And in looking at your background, you're obviously a talented guy, impressive background. What moved you? How or why did you become involved in education?
I've loved it from an early age, and I loved it for a reason probably most do not. A lot of teachers sort of get good grades in school, and they sort of feel like they are succeeding in schools, and so why not stay in schools? That wasn't me. I was not a school success story, BC kind of student through high school. But I was fascinated by the systems. I was fascinated by the opportunity. You know, we don't have a lot of tools in our toolkit in America to help change things like generational poverty and big issues like that. Schools sort of stand as that front line for us. And so, you know, what better place to spend a career than doing all I can to try to make schools great for kids.
Let's talk technology and education. As we wrapped up season 4 of the show, I guess it was a November of 2018 episode, we had Nat Ducan from Robot Lab on the show, and Nat touched briefly on the importance of technology in education in technology. I mean, he's a robot guy, so he wanted to talk about that. He mentioned things like preparation, competition. He talked a lot about integration. Most times it's a healthy exercise where we question, why do we do things? My 2 teenagers ask why too often, but I digress. As you survey the landscape, Dr. Bathon, you're speaking to various groups. What are your arguments in support of the U.S. having a focus on investing in education technology?
I'm a long-term supporter of technology integration in education. I think the primary rationale for why this is vital is that, you know, schools need to be preparing kids for their futures, and their futures are much more technologically advanced than our present. As we have looked back over the last several decades of change, you know, the smartphone I'm talking to you with right now just didn't exist 2 decades ago. And so, you know, a kid in school 2 decades ago who had no exposure to the changes that were happening with the internet is in a really difficult position coming out and facing this very uncertain world where, as you say, robotics are really having a big impact right now in our economy. And so being part of that digital revolution and being able to have the skills to participate in that digital revolution is a really, really vital thing for kids. And so them having those opportunities in school is a great way to invest as a society. Now, there's limitations of technology. I'll probably chat more about that. But on the whole, the readiness for their future, technology readiness is a critical tool.
You mentioned the smartphone, and I even joked with Rick, our producer. I told him, I said, I remember back in 1980 where, calculators, man, that was awesome. To walk into class with a calculator. And
yeah, like the solar kind that had no battery, and it was so confusing.
Oh, stop.
Like, how does this device work?
Yeah, NASA type stuff. Now, nobody listening to the show wants to hear me read a list of things, but there are a multitude of ways that everybody sees technology being used in classrooms. We've talked on the show before about things like AI and virtual reality and the cloud. And so there's a lot going on in the classrooms, but you're in the trenches. What are some cool and interesting ways you see technology being used by educators and students?
Well, I have to tell you a bit of a sad story that public education in America has largely been behind when it comes to technology integration.
True.
As society advanced and business and industry advanced, and your average office workers sitting in front of a computer, even folks working out in factory lines are sort of integrating and having access to computers and robotics that are assisting in those tasks. Public education didn't really keep up. However, a recent technology, which it's not massively recent, but it's within the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen a huge shift. And the sort of platform technology for that huge shift are the Chromebooks that exist out there from many different companies, but all running on that Android operating system, the Chrome operating system that is really affordable. And those devices have sort of reached the price point where schools in America can start to distribute those one device to every one kid. And that ratio of one device to one kid is really a game changer in terms of what schools can do with technology. So we're just within these past 5 or 6 years now really in the digital revolution of schools because we have finally found ways to let each kid have access to a smart device at school all day long.
I mentioned my son. He's a teacher at a middle school, public school here in the Austin area. I hear you talk about the smartphone, and I think about his school, and I think about the challenges for these families who maybe can't afford a smartphone. But anyway, I could be wrong, Dr. Bathon, but I thought I picked up something in your response. In your opinion, is the education model followed today in the U.S. equipping our children? And I don't mean about passing that Spanish or algebra test next week or answering a few ACT questions next year. Will our kids today be prepared for the world in the year 2050?
I hope so. I have 5 kids myself, and they go to public schools, and I'm proud of those public schools. But we are still running a system of public education that is built for a different economic era. We're still running a term, we use the term a lot, whether it's the right term, I think is debatable, but the factory model of school gets used. Where desks in rows. Now, if you go to your average school, you go to your son's classroom, he probably doesn't have the desks in rows. But there's still a lot of lingering components of a system that we built a century ago. Such as all the disciplines divided out into their own subjects and very little sort of multidisciplinary work. That's not how the world works. When you're out trying to solve an engineering challenge, you're trying to solve a bunch of different challenges emerging from different disciplines as you are actively building that new product. And so, those are just legacy components that are in our public education system. And so most of the work that I do, the work that I've been doing all week up until this point, actually, is around helping schools transition to what we call here in Kentucky deeper learning models. And that is starting to get to the core structures of school, such as all those different disciplines divided up, and begin to sort of work our way through that and find ways to bring multidisciplinary projects that lead to performances and assessments, that lead to public defenses of student work, a lot of authenticity into the everyday experience of school for kids. That's not easy work. I've been at it for like a decade. We've been at it for a decade here in Kentucky, and we've made a lot of progress, but there's many schools that we haven't reached yet. And so that's a much broader transition. It's not as much about the tools the tools are an important part of that story because the internet, is such a powerful, game-changing platform that kids need to be able to access. But that really is much more about the structures of school. So I get to work on both of those things, and so it makes my work really interesting on an everyday basis.
You're not alone by any stretch of the imagination, but as somebody sitting here in a studio in Austin, Texas, these groups, these people to whom you're speaking with, are they listening or are they doing something based on what you're suggesting?
I would say both. We were starting this here in Kentucky, the little center that I get to help run called the Center for Next Generation Leadership. We were doing this work 9 years ago, and 9 years ago it was a lot more listening, a little bit of doing, but a lot more listening. We've definitely transitioned, and I think Kentucky's reflective of overall a pretty big transition that's been underway now for a decade. That is starting to ask those questions. You sort of couple that with changes in federal policy. There's some legal things that have been changing. So the No Child Left Behind law, as if you're in America, you've probably heard of that thing. It was very focused on standardized testing. And so we have, as a system, begun to step away from that a little bit. And as we do that, we are beginning to see a little bit more creativity and innovation take place in schools. And so there is definitely some doing going on in any town or city in the country. You can find examples of really innovative schools that are, in many public schools, that are providing a great learning experience for kids. But almost every city and rural area in America, you can also find examples of school as we know it, unchanged for decades. Both of those things exist right now, and it's working to try to get to as many of those classrooms that have remained unchanged as possible.
I watched one of your presentations, heard you mention deeper learning, describe deeper learning, and I thought intriguing stuff. And then you went on and you discussed Genius Hour. What is it, and what are the benefits you're seeing derived from that program, or something similar? Maybe there's a different name for it being used elsewhere in the U.S.
At Google, they would have called it 20% time. It emerged out of actually a university context at Stanford, where as a professor at a research university, some of my time is freed up to pursue creative endeavors that I think can make the world a better place. And so that was sort of the culture at Stanford. Some of that got adopted at Google, and then it sort of got talked about a lot in the country. So education tried out some of those ideas, and so it gets called different things. Genius Hour is a term that gets used in elementaries a lot. And it just sort of means that we're going to take an hour out of the day or some chunk of time out of the week, and we're going to let kids pursue some of their own passions. There's going to be structure around that. There's going to be reading because, especially early elementary, we really focus hard on helping to build literacy skills. So they're going to be reading. There's going to be some research. There probably will be a presentation to the teacher, maybe a presentation to their parents, maybe to a public audience. But they get to follow their own journey. So my oldest now, when he was in middle school, or late elementary school, he got another term gets used is called passion project. So he had a passion project around World War II. He did not deliver the best World War II presentation of all time. Ken Burns is way better at it. But, he got to actually drive his own learning for a little while. And that's actually the powerful part. It is students starting to take ownership of their own learning journey, understanding that the internet is this limitless resource for us to go and find and learn new things. So, we can free the kids up a little bit. They have that Chromebook that they're working on. Remember, technology is part of that story, where they can sort of pursue their passions. So that's all Genius Hour is, as long as it ends in a performance assessment where the kids actually have to show their work in a rigorous way. That type of learning works really well at the elementary level.
Deeper learning in Genius Hour. I encourage those listening to the show right now, do an investigation, get some information. So I think we've already kind of established, Dr. Bathon, that it's not all roses and sunshine. There are still many challenges out there. When it comes to, I want to go back to education technology for a moment. when it comes to education technology, what mistakes or misstep have you witnessed or heard about when it comes to specifically education technology?
A lot, actually. Education technology is a really, really big industry. Now, I've watched listened to some of your other shows. You talk about other really big industries like healthcare and cybersecurity. But education is also a really big industry at the state government level. So like the state of Kentucky or the state of Texas, it's usually their largest expenditure. So there's a lot of money flowing in the world of public education, and technology companies, unsurprisingly, are interested in participating in that. And so there's a lot of education technology out there that is flashy and interesting, but doesn't necessarily lead to deeper learning. And so schools have a real tendency to buy into something that's flashy and sink some dollars into that in the hopes that the kids will find this interesting. Or I'll give you an example, a lot of digital game-based learning out there. So a software product will get purchased that the school district is hoping that the kids are going to love and use and play with, but they probably didn't actually test it with kids to see if they're going to love using this software. And so there's a lot of those kinds of mistakes that are happening still today. I mean, that's a very common occurrence. Education suffers a little bit from a lack of expertise. We also suffer from massive decentralization. So every school district in the country, and there are thousands, are responsible for doing their own purchasing. Sometimes districts will work together to do purchasing, but a lot of the time it is on their own. And so if you're a rural school district out there in Texas, southern Texas, where Austin is a large district and might have a staff of 10 or 15 people working in their technology department, in a rural school district, there's probably just one person working in the technology department. And so that one person has a lot of responsibility to lead that district. And you can see in that context where mistakes are going to be made.
Costly mistakes. It's so interesting hearing you cover that, Dr. Bathon. When I walked in this morning, I looked in BidPrime's database, and there are, and no exaggeration, there are thousands of requests originating from education. And you're right, it's not just from the city of Lexington. It's not just from the city of Austin. It's sea to shining sea kind of stuff. And it's butter, it's buses, but then you get into requests for assistive technology and all kinds of, and you hit on it, all kinds of software solutions as well. And it's thousands of requests being submitted out there. I mentioned those requests, and I'm going to kind of hand the microphone over to you. Our listeners understand that there isn't some endless stream of money for education. And I know that's a conversation, education funding. You and I could have a week-long show 24/7, right? But you've already touched on some things. But if you had the power, if you were made, in charge of everything for a day, and let's make believe that funding isn't an issue, what would you like to see the U.S. do in education? It doesn't even have to do with STEM or technology and education. You're in D.C. and you're in the big room in charge of everything. What do you want to see done?
Well, I want to be at the state government level because we run it's actually, when it comes to public education, it's 50 different countries that we run here. So I would love to explore deeper investments in networking. So that's a funny term potentially to use, as I just talked about all these school districts out there on their own. But I think there is new networking approaches that can help us solve a lot of the very difficult challenges that we're faced with right now.
When you say networking, are you talking about like best practices?
Both, actually. So it's a combination. There's this really interesting idea out there called platform networks. Tom Vander Ark, who we can put in the show notes, has done some good writing on this, where you're linking together a suite of technology tools, but also a sort of human network around those technology tools in terms of how is it that, what are the best practices we should be employing? And more specifically, even than best practices, I think we in public education for a long time have known best practices. What are the set of system changes that we need to employ to let our teachers spend more time on best practices? And so those system changes have proven to be very, very difficult. And I think we're seeing some really emerging success in schools being part of really intelligent, intentional networks who are working through the difficulties of those system changes together. I'll give you an example from Texas, and this is actually a nationwide example, but the Texas legislature has just done something interesting that's worth mentioning. So there's this great network out there called the New Tech Network. It started in California, but it's really a nationwide network now, and hundreds of schools participate. Schools choose to participate much more because of a philosophical approach rather than this is the school district that I happen to be next door to. You know, most of our history of networking and public education is geographical because it's just the people around us. But the internet, of course, makes that, we can change that with the internet. And so schools are starting to network more philosophically about what they believe education should be. School boards are getting more clear about what they want for their kids at a local level. So New Tech's a good example of this. You take El Paso, which is there in Texas. They've invested heavily in the New Tech Network. And now the Texas legislature has stepped up with a financial approach that helps to incentivize schools if they want to be part of that kind of a network. So when you join onto that network, you also get technology tools. That's part of what it means to sign on to the network. There is a network fee, but embedded in that network fee is technology tools. Those technology tools come pre-populated with a bunch of curriculum activities and a bunch of things that teachers can use. So you can see how it's a pretty holistic, all-in kind of model. But we're seeing from my seat at the university, watching this unfurl across the country, districts are making a lot of change pretty quickly when they jump into some of these networks. Big Picture is another example. Expeditionary learning is another example. So that, for me, if I'm sitting in that seat, that's what I would be very curious about.
Are there any other upcoming appearances, research, or the like that you would like to share with our audience?
There's some really big conversations because there's so much money involved in education technology. A couple of years ago, I'll link up to some really deep work that the University of Virginia led across a variety of domains when it comes to education technology and purchasing. That if you happen to be in that world, you might find that to be super useful. In terms of this world of deeper learning, there's a lot of events that are beginning to percolate across the country. Of course, those networks are helping to drive that work. But, I would encourage people within their local context to start searching words like deeper learning or personalized learning. That sometimes has a little bit of baggage with it. But those kinds of terms are sort of the set of ideas that these schools across the country are starting to wrap their heads around. And then I would encourage you to go talk to their chief academic officer, not the chief executive officer, not the superintendent, not the principal. Go talk to the person that's in charge of teaching and learning. Those are the folks that are leading this. And usually that's like a number 2 person in the school district called a chief academic officer. Those folks actually have a really tight sense of these changes that are underway. And so if you want to know what's going on in your local context and get involved and be a part of this, that's where I would point you.
On behalf of our audience, appreciate you again carving some time out of your busy schedule. So much respect and appreciation for the good work that you and folks there in and around your department are doing in the field of education. It's such important work.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
There again, my visit with Dr. Bathon, some thought-provoking ideas, questions. True? It's time for a quick crazy bid. It's that time of the show. And since we just talked about education, let's stay in that lane. There's a lot of learning going on. Check this out. The city of Santa Fe in New Mexico has a bid request out for Learn to Skate in New Mexico. Well, I pulled some of the information, some of the details, specs from the bid. The contractor shall provide the following Learn to Skate services for the city of Santa Fe: Must have understanding of the United States figure skating basic skills, learn to skate USA curriculum, and remain current. Of course. Not sure what that means, but it's important. 70% of Learn to Skate USA classes must be dedicated to free skate 6 levels and below. For those of you interested, the bid expires October 7th, so you ice skaters in Santa Fe, lace them up and good luck. That does it for this episode. Thanks for sharing, downloading, and following our show, The Big Bid Theory. The end of Season 5 is in our sights, not far off. But before we get to that point, email us. If there's a topic you have in mind, we're kind of bouncing some ideas. My email is bculhane@bidprime.com. You can also give us a follow on Twitter at The Big Bid Theory. My Twitter, if you want to connect, is contract_hunter. And remember, we're on Facebook as well. Powered by Bid Prime for Ricky J, Rick Jennings, and Kevin Henderson. I'd pay good money, by the way, to see those native Texans ice skate. Thanks again to Dr. Justin Bathon from the University of Kentucky, helping to shape a classroom near you. The future marches on. Ask questions about education near and around you. This is Bill Culhane. Until next time, go Gunners, Barracudas, Tigers, Bobcats, and Cubs. And we wish you all the best in growing your business.
Powered by Bid Prime, we thank you for tuning in to The Big Bid Theory. From Austin, Texas, the show is produced by Bill Culhane and Jim Ward. Producer and engineer is Rick Jennings. Distribution, research, and production assistance by Lauren Jones and Kevin Henderson. You can find other episodes of The Big Bid Theory on platforms to include iHeart, iTunes, Spreaker, and Google Play.